The last lesson was supposed to be 40 minutes. It was 3 hours and 11 minutes, and she passed her test 6 days later. And the night she did, she called me before she called anyone else. And I stood in my kitchen holding my phone like a man who had just been handed evidence in a case he'd been pretending not to build. She said, "I wanted you to know first." And I said, "That's great, Maya. I'm really glad." And I meant it. Both sentences, fully. I was also aware, while saying them, that I was the kind of person who hears, "I wanted you to know first," and files it carefully in the drawer labeled, "Probably nothing," and then sits on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes after the call ends. That is what I did. That is where this starts. My name is James Calloway. I'm 36. I teach high school history, the kind of subject where you spend a lot of time explaining to 16-year-olds that the reasons people do things are usually smaller and more human than the textbooks suggest. I'm good at it. I notice patterns. I notice when something that looks inevitable in retrospect was, at the time, just a person making a small decision in a particular direction. I tell you this because I spent 7 weeks failing to apply any of it to myself. I live in the same city I grew up in, which either says something about loyalty or something about radius, depending on your view. My apartment has good light, too many books, and a kitchen table I eat at alone while reading, which I have decided is a lifestyle rather than a symptom. My car is a 10-year-old Volvo that has survived 2 minor incidents and 1 parking garage column that I consider a structural rather than vehicular failure. The Volvo is relevant. Her name was Maya Osei. She was 32. She was a product designer at a tech company downtown, the kind of person who could explain why a button was 2 pixels too far to the left and make you understand it was the reason the whole thing felt wrong. I had met her 4 months before the driving lessons at a pub quiz where she had been on the opposing team and where she had answered a question about the Treaty of Westphalia with a confidence so specific and so incorrect that I had, against my better judgment, corrected her from across the table. She had looked at me. I had looked at her. Her teammate said, "He's right, May." She had said, "I know." And then, after a pause, "I still think the framing was unfair." She was wrong about the framing. I thought about it for 3 days afterward. We had mutual friends, Priya and Dom, who were the kind of couple who quietly arranged collisions between people they thought should meet, and then waited with the patient confidence of gardeners. It was Dom who mentioned, 2 months after the quiz, that Maya needed to learn to drive, and that her last attempt at lessons had ended badly, and that she was now terrified of automatic transmission, which is, and I say this with all due respect, an extraordinary achievement. "She needs someone patient," Dom said. "Someone who won't make her feel stupid." "I'm a teacher," I said. "I know," he said, and left it there. I have, in retrospect, been managed by Dom Adeyemi on several occasions. He is very good at it and feels no guilt. The first lesson was a Tuesday in October, which meant low light and damp leaves on the road, and Maya in the passenger seat of my Volvo, wearing an expression that was carefully calibrated to project confidence, while her hands gave her away entirely. She had them in her lap, both of them, pressed flat against her thighs. I said, "The car is in park. Nothing is happening yet." She said, "I know that." I said, "You look like something is happening." She said, "I look prepared." She did not look prepared. She looked like a woman who had already mentally rehearsed 3 variations of the same crash and was now waiting to find out which one was accurate. I recognized the expression. I saw it at the start of every school year on students who had decided they were bad at history before the first class had started. "What happened with the last instructor?" I asked. "He sighed," she said. "At what?" "Everything," she said. Quietly. "He had a specific sigh for each mistake. You could rank them." I told her I didn't sigh. She said, "Everyone says that." I did not sigh for the entirety of the 7 weeks. I'm proud of this in a way that is disproportionate to the achievement, but I stand by it. The first lesson, she moved the car 12 feet forward in a car park, and then stopped it and looked at me with the expression of someone who had just done something they hadn't fully believed was possible. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. "That wasn't terrible." "No," I said. "It wasn't." She smiled at the windshield, not at me, at the 12 feet. It was the kind of smile you give to something you've been afraid of that just flinched first. That is hiding with better branding. I filed it in the drawer. I drove home. The lessons were Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 40 minutes, car park for the first two, and then quiet roads, and then, by week 4, proper roads with proper traffic and proper stakes. She was a fast learner in the way that careful people are fast learners. Not reckless, just efficient once she trusted the process. She asked good questions. She was honest about the mistakes rather than defensive. When she stalled twice at the same junction, she said flatly, "This junction has a personal grievance with me," and then figured out the clutch adjustment and did it correctly 4 times in a row. I told her that was exactly what problem-solving looked like. She said, "You're very encouraging for someone who's doing this for free." "I'm a teacher," I said. "It's a disease." She laughed at that. The real kind, quick, genuine, with no performance in it. I had learned, by week 3, to distinguish the laughs. There was the polite one, short, slightly behind the beat, used in social situations. There was the surprised one, when something landed faster than she expected. And there was the real one, which came from somewhere lower and had a slight exhale at the end, like she'd let something go. I was cataloging this information with no plan for what to do with it. This is historically how my problems begin. She had a travel mug, matte black, slightly dented on one side, with a small circular sticker of a sonar wave on it that she'd never explained and that I had not asked about. It was on the dashboard for every lesson. She always brought it already empty, which meant she'd drunk whatever was in it before she arrived, and she'd hold it sometimes at junctions, not drinking, just holding, and I came to understand this was what she did instead of fidgeting. A weighted anchor, shaped like coffee. I noticed this in week 2 and thought about it in week 4, and didn't examine why until week 6, which is around the time I started losing my place in whatever I was reading after the Thursday lessons. By week 5, she was good. Better than good. She was confident in the way that earns itself rather than assumes itself. She made decisions. She checked mirrors before I reminded her. She anticipated the junction she'd stalled at 4 times and said, entering it, I know, to herself, quiet, like she was managing a minor but familiar opponent. Something in that got me. I looked out the passenger window so she wouldn't see my expression. Week 6, she parallel parked on the first try. She pulled up the handbrake, looked at the curb, looked in the mirror, and said, I said, "What?" She said, "I thought I'd feel more." I said, "You'll feel it on your test." She said, "I mean about all of it." She was still looking in the mirror. "I thought I'd feel more relieved. When I was able to do it, I thought I'd feel done. Like the fear was on the other side of the skill." She paused. "It's not really about driving, is it?" she said. "It's rarely about the thing," I said. She looked at me then. The way she did when something landed true. Not a smile, not a laugh, just a direct, open look that lasted about 1 second longer than a neutral look does. "Right," she said, and started the car again. I blamed the parallel parking for the fact that I couldn't name a single thing I'd read that evening. The last lesson was a Thursday. She knew it was the last one. The test was the following Wednesday. I'd said it was up to her whether she wanted to keep going, that she was more than ready, that the last lesson was more for comfort than skill at this point. She'd said she wanted to do it. She'd seemed, when she said it, like a person who had something else to say, but was deciding whether to. I had noticed this. I had not said anything about it. It had rained earlier, and the roads were that particular post-rain clean. The streetlights doubled in the wet tarmac. She drove well. She always drove well now. And we did the route she'd done for the last 2 weeks, the one she'd said felt like hers, the loop that went down past the river and back up through the park road. She'd said, the first time she did it without incident, "Okay, I like this one." We were 20 minutes in when she said, "Can we stop for a minute?" I said, "Is something wrong?" She said, "No." She pulled over at the river lay-by, clean and deliberate, indicators on, mirrors checked, everything correct. She put the handbrake on and left the engine running and looked at the river for a moment. I waited. "I need to tell you something," she said. I have poor survival instincts around women who say that quietly while looking at rivers. I sat very still. When Dom told me you'd offered to teach me, she said, I said no. Twice. I looked at her. I'd met you at the quiz, she said. You were the person who corrected me in front of 8 people, with the exact specific patience of someone who knows they're right and knows you know they're right. And I thought, I cannot be bad at something in front of that man. I cannot sit in his car and stall his car and be the person I am when I'm afraid of something, in front of him. She paused. Because the person I am when I'm afraid of something is honest, she said. Transparent. I can't do the performance when I'm scared. And I didn't want you to see that before you'd seen anything else. Outside, a lamp over the river threw a long gold stripe across the water. But Dom told me you'd offered, she said. And then I thought about it for 4 days and I said yes. Why? I said. She turned and looked at me with the particular look, the direct one, the open one. Because I wanted you to see it, she said. I decided I'd rather you see the honest version than the version I perform for people I'm not sure about yet. That sentence did something to the room that the room did not recover from. I looked at her. She held her hands still on the wheel, not gripping, just resting there, the way she did when she'd settled into something. You have a drawer, she said, where you put things you don't know what to do with. I said, I do. I've been putting things in it for you, she said. I kept hoping you'd open it. I had not thought of it that way. I thought about it now. I thought about the 12 feet in the car park, the sonar sticker I'd never asked about, the empty travel mug on the dashboard, every time. The way she'd said, I wanted you to know first, and I'd sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes after. I'm not great, I said, at knowing when something is allowed to be the thing it is. I know, she said. I find that very annoying. That's fair. She laughed, the real kind. And then she looked at me, and her face did the thing it did when she'd decided something. A settling, a stillness, like a plan that had finally found its start point. Say something, she said. Say the thing in the drawer. I looked at her. From the beginning, I said, you argued with the Treaty of Westphalia, and then told me you knew you were wrong. And I thought, I want to know every other opinion you hold incorrectly with that kind of conviction. I have thought that exact sentence, in that exact form, probably 40 times since October. She was quiet for a moment. That's the most historian thing anyone has ever said to me, she said. Is it too much? No, she said. It's exactly right. She reached over and took the hand I had on the gear shift. Not dramatic, not fast, just took it the way you take something that was always going to end up there, and held it with both of hers, the way you hold something you've been careful with for a while and are finally allowed to just hold. I turned my hand over. Her fingers settled into mine. She looked at them for a moment, then at me. The engine was still running. The river did what rivers do. I should probably turn the engine off, she said. You should, I said. You left the handbrake on, though, so we were fine. Of course I did, she said. I'm an excellent driver. I laughed. She laughed. We sat in the parked car by the river with the engine off and the gold light on the water while, somewhere up the road, a dog barked twice and then apparently resolved whatever its issue was and stopped. She passed her test 6 days later with 1 minor. She called me first. I said I'm really glad and meant it. And this time I didn't sit on the kitchen floor. I said, come over. We should eat something that isn't a lesson. She said, was that a date? I said, I'm a historian. I prefer to examine how things developed rather than label them in the moment. A pause. That is, she said, the worst excuse for asking someone on a date I have ever heard. Is it working? Yes, she said. 3 months later, I asked about the sonar sticker. We were at my kitchen table, Sunday morning, coffee, the particular quiet of a morning that has nowhere it needs to be. She was reading something on her phone. I was reading something I'd been trying to finish for 2 weeks. The sticker, I said, the sonar wave, on the travel mug. She looked up. From a project, she said. Years ago. We were designing an app for whale migration tracking. It didn't ship. I kept the sticker because I liked the idea of something that maps things by listening. She went back to her phone. I looked at the side of her face, a map made by listening. I thought about the 40 minutes becoming 3 hours and 11 minutes. I thought about the drawer and what she'd been quietly putting in it and how long she'd waited for me to open it. I had poor survival instincts. She had better ones. She had simply waited until the evidence was conclusive. I went back to my book and finished it that morning for the first time in 2 weeks. A year after that, she drove us to Priya and Dom's for dinner in a car she'd bought herself. A small gray Citroen she'd named after the junction that had given her trouble. She parallel parked in one move outside their house and looked at the curb in the mirror and said, What? I said. I thought I'd feel more, she said. She was smiling when she said it. She knew I'd remember. I remembered everything. That was the point of me. 2 years later, when people asked how we started, and people asked because Dom told the story in a way that made himself sound prescient. He was, but I wasn't going to give him that yet. Maya would say, he taught me to drive and then was shocked when I arrived at a destination. And I would say, historians prefer process over conclusion. And she would say, he spent 7 weeks filing evidence in a drawer and then needed me to ask him to open it. And I would say, I'm thorough. And she would say, you're mine, which is different. She was right. It was. What would you have done if someone told you they'd said yes specifically because they wanted you to see the honest version of them? And have you ever known something for a long time before you let yourself say it? Tell me in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.